Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different, a build log of a micro quadcopter. Now I'm calling it a build log because I'm doing something a little bit different this time. I have built lots of these before, but I'm going to try and do it with as little weight as possible. So let's go through all the components first of all, and hopefully it'll help you to build your own or give you some ideas to modify how I'm doing this. So start off with the first thing. These are the Hubsan propellers. Again, all of this is up for change. It depends how everything goes, but I find that the Hubsan H107D propellers are the most efficient. Next, we've got some 28 gauge wire. Now, I got this off eBay, and it is only in black. I do have some red as well, so that might not be the exact wire that I use in the build, but that's what I'll be using, 28 gauge. So next is the frame. This is Picnic Quad's frame, the H frame, and here we have the platform, but this is what I'm hoping to do away with. It might not work. We'll see how it goes in the rest of the build, but this weighs 6 grams and this weighs about 3 grams, so I can save 3 grams, plus also the fittings as well. You get these screws and things, and you also have these sort of rubber dampeners as well. They all take up extra weight. Obviously that's great for not getting jello and things, but you tend not to need it on these micro quads, I found, so we'll see how that goes, but I'm hopefully going to try and fit everything to this little board. That's FPV, the controller board. So anyways, let's go on to the next part. So this is the H107C 2 megapixel HD camera. I'm not quite sure it's HD, but it's probably the best that we're going to get for this size at this particular time. I know obviously we've got other quadcopters coming out. There's the Hubsan H107D Plus, there's the Proto X FPV, which is already out, which does seem to have better quality picture than this, but it's really expensive. This is really cheap. I'm also trying to do this quite cheaply as well. So yeah, so also we've got this, which is the 808/16 lens module, which we'll be using to make this a wide angle. So next we've got the Hubsan H107D controller board and some rubber bands. You can never go wrong with lots of rubber bands. I'll be using that to secure the battery, hopefully. This is a really good way to try different batteries rather than using a specific battery base size. And then onto the interesting stuff. This is the 5.8 gigahertz VTX from FPV Hobby. It should weigh 1.9 grams in total, and this is the little cloverleaf antenna that fits onto it. And then this is interesting. This is a 5-volt regulator from FPV Hobby as well, and it's also kind of a mini power distribution board. It claims to give out no noise from the motors at all while keeping a steady 5 volts, and we've got lots of different pins here which we'll look at later, but it's got video that can go in, audio in and out, voltage in and out, so, and it comes with these pins. So hopefully for the first time I'm going to be doing everything off one battery. That is the plan. Usually I use a 100 milliamp battery to get rid of any noise, but as this regulator's claiming to have no noise, that's pretty cool, so I want to check that out. And finally, we have the motors here, which are £3.70 motors off eBay with the long wires. So those are all the components. They may change slightly throughout the build. Like I say, this is a log, and of course we'll be needing a soldering iron to solder everything together and some solder, and also my favorite, plenty of hot glue. I'm hoping that I can hot glue all this stuff onto the frame, and also we'll do a flight test and we'll see how much it weighs and things like that. So yeah. Oh, I should mention, yes, that using this 2 megapixel board, as previously, it does have video out, so we'll be showing how that works as well. Okay, let's get on to the build. Okay, so the first thing I usually start with is soldering the motors to the controller board. Now it's important to note that when the Hubsan controller board fits on the frame, it's upside down, which is a bit confusing when come to soldering, because that means your clockwise and counterclockwise motors, you're gonna be soldering them backwards or upside down. So you can use this video for a reference if you like, but in this instance, in the motors, the black and white wires are the clockwise, and the red and blue are the counterclockwise. But of course, because this is backwards, it's going to appear that the clockwise motors are fitting on the counterclockwise side, but that's not true. When you flip it upside down, or should I say the right way around, then the motors sit the correct way around. So I'm using this leaded solder. It's really old and battered, but what I tend to find is that on these Hubsan boards, they're using non-leaded solder, which takes a lot longer to heat up. So I'm using if I just move the camera over here, my soldering iron here. It's just a cheap one. It's not an expensive one with a heat control, but it tends to do the job. What I do is I just tin all of the contacts here with my leaded solder, and then that makes it melt easier. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I mean, I should state that all of this is very fiddly, and I may use this, which is my cheap sort of helping hands. It's just a pair of pliers with a rubber band on it, and it can hold stuff in place. Let's see if I can do it without it first. So I'm just gonna heat it up. Apologies for my shaky hands. There we go. I'm just gonna go ahead and tin all these. Now there's a lot of solder pads on here for the LEDs, so it can be quite confusing which solder pads we're using, because you've got these ones here for the motors, but these ones here for the LEDs. They are labeled LEDs. This one's fun, it's got a nice tick line through it. Because say, if you've got a decent soldering iron, you could probably heat up the pads that are pre-tinned, but this is just something I'm having to do. Okay, so what I tend to do next is just tin these tiny wires with the solder so that we can get a fairly good contact. It's quite difficult to get a good contact with such tiny wires, but we can have a go. It might take a few tries. Need to get a bit more solder on my iron. And I just dip the end in like that. Do that one again. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that for all the motors whilst I'm here. It's really difficult working with these motors. They love sticking together. Just going to clean this iron a bit. It's got a bit dirty. I'm terrible at keeping the iron clean. The smell of leaded solder, lovely. Oh, and the motors have stuck together. That's something that happens quite frequently with these. Maybe this isn't the best way around to do it, but it's how I do it. I think it's good to show how to get the quad set up in sort of its standard frame form before adding the FPV gear and whatnot. Okay, so let's go ahead and start attaching the motors. Clean the iron up a bit more. Okay, I'm going to start with the clockwise motor. And so the black wire goes on the minus pad, and the white wire on the plus pad. Yeah, this is what happens with the motors. Lovely. Okay, I'm gonna peel away a counterclockwise motor. And so with the counterclockwise motor, the blue wire goes on the minus and the red wire on the plus. You have to be very careful not to bridge these because they're so close together. It doesn't really matter what order you solder these on, by the way. They're all going to stick to each other. Okay, we want blue on the minus. This is a difficult side for me because I am left-handed. So I can't hold the iron very well this side. Okay, on to the last one. Okay, and that's it. That's all the motors soldered. And you sort of get this here. Now, if that's as far as you're wanting to go with it, you can attach this to the frame of your picnic quads or whatever frame you desire. And that should be sufficient. You know, you plug your battery in and away you go. But obviously I'm adding other components. So on to the next part. Now here is where it gets a bit challenging. My next task is to solder the 2 megapixel camera and tap into the power of the Hubsan controller. But also, to power the VTX, we're going to need another wire coming off this, going this way, towards the regulator. So my hope is to put a blob of solder on here, and then very quickly attach these two without bridging this, and then do the same with the negative wire. Now there is probably a better way to do this, but this is the only way I know how to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do, without trying to knock the camera over, is again tin these blobs here so that I can get my solder mixed in with their solder. This is really tricky, this bit. Of course, the trick is the whole time not to bridge any of them either, which I don't think I've done so far, hopefully. So I'm going to attempt to put this side in first. And hope that it doesn't come apart when I add the second. Okay, so that side's in. Now let's try to add this as well. This is the tricky bit. I'm going to tin that. Clean the iron. And cut this end shorter so that it doesn't short out. We don't want that happening. See if that's worked. Yep, seems so. Let's try the ground. Okay, and then the black wire. Clip it so it's a bit shorter. Before I carry on, I just wanted to show you a close-up of that wiring for the motors, but also what I've done here. So we've got the positive and negative going into the positive and negative on here, and then 2 out to the regulator. Okay, so next I'm adding the 5-volt regulator. I've decided to use my cheating helping hands. The component's just too small to handle. So I appreciate this is very small. I'm going to try and zoom in once I've completed it, just to give you an idea of what to do. Because these components are absolutely tiny. Going to add a blob of solder now, if that works. Let's see if that did it. Yep, seems so. Let's go for the ground and do the same. That one's staying in place a little bit better. I think I've taken the solder off there. That's it. Gosh, these components are so tiny. That's why they're called micro. Okay, so next is to connect the VTX up to all this power distribution. Now, I suppose that you could connect all this to the quad at the moment, but I haven't done, because what I found in the past is if one of these wires aren't connected properly, you have to take it all apart, and that sometimes rips some of these little tiny connections out. So I'm going to connect it all through this first of all and see how that goes. Okay, I'm going to use my cheating grips again to install the voltage in on the VTX. I'm using this pair of cutters as well just to hold the wire in place while I solder it. The components are so small on this, I'm going to have to be careful that I don't knock them. Also, my soldering iron wire is knocking the camera tripod. Here goes. It's so tiny. Clean the iron up a bit. I can't even see it. It's so tiny. And there's a component right underneath it. So I don't want to bridge that. I think we've got it. Let's see. Yep. So now I'm going to do the same with the black wire for the ground. In video, I'm afraid video you would usually use yellow wire, but I don't have any, so yeah, I'm just poking it through the hole of the ground. It's so tiny. And try to solder it without shaking or knocking it. Oh, I'm not doing a very good job on the not shaking part. I'm not sure that's... Yep, it's gone in just. I might as well do the video wire whilst I'm here. Okay, I had to reposition that because the camera is in the way. So, try and solder this last video on. You can see here it's quite time consuming. I think that's got it. Just want to make sure that... Now what I did there was I made the wire a little bit longer and bent it over. I'll take it out of these grips to show you, if I can. Focus. It's not going to focus. Well, anyways, I'm just going to cut that little bit of extra wire off so that it doesn't short anything. Just going to inspect this to make sure that I don't have anything bridging or shorting, which I don't, amazingly. Okay, so now the next thing is to connect this to connect the ground and voltage to the regulator and then the video, and hopefully we'll be able to power it up and see something. Okay, I've propped up my ground and plus voltage ready for solder. This is really tricky. Careful not to touch the ones already being soldered. And that's it. The last thing to do is connect the video up. Now, there are sections on this power distribution board for video, okay? But I can't see a reason to attach them, I can't see how this could clean up video, because it's just the power that causes that problem. But we'll see. If I get interference when all this is set up, I may change my mind and change that. Okay, so in my experience, this is the hardest part to solder, just because the pads aren't very good. But it's the fourth pad along. 1, 2, 3, 4. The best thing to do is not tin this pad here, because once the pads are worn, they're worn and that's it, and they very easily get worn. So this is probably the most risky bit, I would say. I'm gonna tin the cable. This is the video cable. Try and get a big blob of solder on there. Then try to clean the iron a bit. Okay, and this is tricky. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I'm going to cut that wire down a little bit. I don't want too much of it sticking out the end. Shaky hands. Right. May have to go off camera to do this, because it's tricky. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it doesn't like this. I'll try and put a blob on the solder pad, but that's usually not a good idea because it doesn't stick very well. Oh, I've got a bit of solder on there. Hopefully it's enough. Yes, got it. And so, after all this time, what do we end up with? A big flaming mess of wires. Trust me, it should work. The antenna should be fairly straightforward, famous last words. You've got 3 pins, which is the center pin, and then these 2 bits here are just the ground of the coax. And then they just slot into here like that. And then you solder it all in. That's the plan. So this bit, it seems, is very fiddly. Okay, so I have propped up the VTX using the cheetah pliers, and now I'm going to attempt to solder them in. Hopefully it'll be easier once I've got one in. Okay, that's one. Try not to catch it. That's 2. And that's 3. Right, that was fun, wasn't it? Okay, the next bit then is, I guess, to power it all up. Oh, obviously I need to add an SD card. I didn't include that in the parts list, but yes, you need an SD card to do the recording as well. Okay, let's just turn on these scales and see how much the whole thing weighs. I'll be really careful here. Right, so it is weighing only 28 grams. So that means with the 6 grams, I'll just go in and reach it. The 6 gram plate, this is 34 grams it's coming to. It's going to be a little bit heavier than that because it's going to be a few grams of hot glue in the propellers as well. But I think this is going to be a really light setup. Hopefully that will give us some good flight time. So the next thing I'm going to do is connect it together just to make sure that the video is working, and I'll show you that next. Okay, so I have plugged it in and we've got a light on the camera, which is good. And I'm going to use the Hubsan Tx here and let it bind. Okay, the motors are turning, that's good. So now I'm going to try and find the frequency. Now on here it says that the frequencies are 5645 to 5800, which is the DJI Foxtech Bosscam and FatShark band. So this is the FPV hobby website, this is the manual. So I'm going to go on here and select the 5.8 gig frequency. And I'm going to search for the channels and see which channel we get a video on. Oh, there. Oh, that's strange. Where's the camera? There. 2.5. Ah. Let me see if I can turn the light off on the camera. Now, this is quite unusual. I am tuned into frequency 5925 here, which is not actually listed here. So I'm starting to think that the channels are wrong. 5925, and you can't see it very well. Ah, there we go. Getting a perfectly clear picture on 5925. So let's press the button here and see what happens to the frequencies. Okay, so that's changed frequency. Let's change the frequency on here. Let's go up. Look at that. That's on frequency 5945, which also isn't listed on there. I think that perhaps the frequencies are incorrect. Let's press the button again and keep going. What frequency are there? 735, 740. So 5740 is listed on there. However, I don't think that's the... that could be, yeah, that could be the main signal. It seems to be transmitting on a range of frequencies there. I'm picking up a picture on 750, 745, 740, 735, 730 for that first button, which is quite a few different bands. I'm sure one is stronger than the other. I can check out the RSSI later. So I'm going to press the button again. Let's go up. So that literally then covers the next load of bands. Yeah. 6.5, 670. Press the button again. We'll go up. 5.75. See, none of those are actually listed on here. But maybe it's just the signal is strong. It's picking it up, but you can see there we're on 5.775. And according to this, it should go 760 and then 780, but it's really going through all those channels there. 75, 80, 85 still got a clear picture, 90. I mean, I am in close proximity with it. There's the camera there. But it's working, that's the main thing. Now, some of you are probably wondering, how's he going to take that pile of mess and wires and fit it to this frame? Well, fear not, because I'm worried about that too. In fact, what I'm going to have to do is, as this is a new build that I've not tried before, I might not be able to achieve it. However, I'm going to go away from the camera, because I could be here some time, figure out how I'm going to mount everything, and what materials I'm going to use, and then I'll show you how I did it. So I've connected all the motors and twisted the wires. That seems to make the wires neater, and also I think it eradicates some interference. I don't know, people seem to do that anyways. I just find it neat because the wires both stay together. So now it's still looking pretty much a mess, so it's time to get out the hot glue gun. Okay, so muchos hot glue later, we come to the final stage, which is adding the 808 lens. You can see I've got everything in place except I've left this camera dangling because I've realized that it'd be really difficult to remove the standard lens off this one and replace it with the 808. So you just pull these lugs out here, and that fetches the camera module out. Now, this is usually glued in and it's very thin, so you can't just twist it with your hand. If I remember rightly, this is an absolute pain to get out. So let's see if we can do that next. The lip on it is so tiny. Oh, I've done it. I think. Yep, it's turning. So I held it in my hand and then twisted. And, oh yes, that lens is a little bit broken. I don't think I'll be using that. But it's worth it. Oh, I hope I didn't break this. It's so fragile there. Okay, so now that that is twisting off, this is the 808 lens, which you can see is a bit battered. This one's a broken one. But actually, to remove this, you do have glue around here. I use the same method of using these. It's easier to twist this one. You've got more purchase. So this one is one that I've already done. It's got a bit of plasticine under there, because I tend to use plasticine to tighten them up because they get a bit loose. I use plasticine and then hot glue over the top. So what we're going to do is take this lens completely off and very quickly add this one in, making sure we don't get anything on the sensor. See, that fits quite loose. So the next thing to do is pop this back in. I'm going to glue that underneath, and then we will use the live FPV to focus it. Okay, this is the finished item, or finished for now, I should say. I'm really pleased with how it's come out. Look at that ultra thin profile there. So we've got the FPV hobby regulator placed at the front here. Now this is important because this regulator here is to eradicate noise from the motors. However, they give off quite a bit of noise themselves, so you just have to make sure that you place it opposite of your VTX. This is a really nice setup. So this is just pinned in with hot glue. This is in with hot glue. Obviously you can see that the lens there covered in hot glue so we don't get vibrations. Also there is some plasticine underneath as well. I use that first of all just to keep it in place whilst I focus the lens. So then underneath, obviously we've got the 2 megapixel HD cam. You don't want to put hot glue on your VTX because they get really warm anyways and it melts the hot glue. So what I did was I've put a band underneath here through the holes and that keeps it tight, and also some double-sided tape there, so that should keep it on. I did make one addition, but you're probably wondering why doesn't this match the images I saw earlier. I've added in a JST connector, which does add a little bit of weight, and that is just for my testing really. It's just so that I can disconnect the camera if I want to, but that was just for testing purposes. Obviously you don't have to do that, but look how thin this is. I'm really pleased with how this has gone. And so the final weight, just turn on the scales. Hopefully the camera will focus. The final weight is 39 grams. Now it could be lighter than that. Obviously I've added quite a lot of hot glue to this, but I'm happy with 39 grams really. 38, so it must be 38 point something, nearly 39. It probably could be as light as 36 if I didn't have that JST connector added and all the hot glue, but this is the best build that I've come up with so far, so let's go and check some of the different footage that I can get with it. Nope, I think it's going to be an indoor flight. Okay, so this is the first video that I shot. This is directly off the SD card. It has to be indoors, I'm afraid. The weather is just too terrible outside. And the lighting is awful in these rooms. This camera, it doesn't pick up the lighting as good as, say, an 808-16 would, or a Mobius, but this is probably the best you're going to get at this date. And for this size, you can see I'm recording at the same time as doing FPV, and it's definitely doable. A lot of people commented on my last video that there seems to be a delay. There's no delay at all. There's a slight frame rate drop as the processor is doing both, but there's definitely no delay. I mean, there's a slight delay anyways on the FPV feed, as there are for all FPV feeds, and it's exactly the same latency when recording as not recording. You can see here my head's down, FPVing, absolutely no problem. The biggest challenge was the light. I think this setup's going to be much better for outside. I think I pull a stupid face here. Yeah, very clever. I think I was just really happy with this setup. I'll show you in a bit the DVR footage. I plugged in my 5.8 receiver into the computer to show you what you actually see on the screen. I have to say the FPV hobby regulator is the best regulator I've seen and used. Any regulator that I have used hasn't really done its job when it comes to noise. Sure, it can keep the voltage fine, but still get a bit of noise seepage through. And I can say with this regulator, there's no noise at all. The only bit of noise that I get is when the battery gets too close to the VTX, but that's noise from the battery feeding through to the VTX. It's not coming through the motors or anything like that, so just make sure that your battery is not directly underneath the VTX. Also make sure that the regulator is away from the VTX, and I have absolutely no noise. I think I'm going to be buying a bunch of these because usually I use a separate 100 milliamp battery for my video just because it's cleaner this way, I don't have to. I can use the battery from the quad. It makes the quad a lot lighter, and you can see there we've got an FPV landing. Great stuff. So this is the footage from the DVR. As you can see, absolutely no interference from the motors whatsoever. The only noise that I'm getting on the screen is due to the fact that it's really low light. I mean, it is super low light in this room. And second of all, this VTX very nicely comes with its cloverleaf antenna, and I'm not using a cloverleaf antenna on the video receiver. I don't have one that sits in an upright position, so we're getting quite a bit of multipathing there, and that is literally just from the incompatibility between the antennas, which is my fault. You can see I pass through the fan and we get multipathing, but the quality is fantastic. Now, I've set it in the recording mode, and as you can see there, they've got a slight frame rate drop, but nothing terrible. It's still FPV-able, is that a word? But anyways, I fly around the room for a bit. I'm very limited to what I can do here. Obviously, it's a very small room, so I land it shortly, and I turn the recording off. You can see a couple of icons here. The top icon there, I'm sure, is just a software thing to show that the microphone is turned off. And then the red text at the bottom, the red numbers, show you how long you've been recording for. I sort of did a quick sort of just shake against the recording video there, just to show that there's very low latency. Yeah, so as I say, the recording at the bottom changes. So when I pick the quad up now and press the button on the side, which stops the recording, you'll get some other icons. It seems that I'm struggling. There we go. So what this shows is how much time is left recording at the bottom, which is quite nice. And then you've got an SD card icon there. So that is showing you that there's 2 hours, 9 minutes and 49 seconds worth of recording left. And again, that multipathing there, nothing to do with the receiver. It's the incompatibility with the antennas there. I do have a cloverleaf antenna receiver. I was just lazy and didn't connect it, but yeah, you can see there in front of the fan between the receiver we get multipathing. So yeah, you can see that the frame rate is higher this time. Still a really nice picture. The white balance is a little... Well, actually, I'd say the white balance was accurate, because in this kind of light, the door is yellow and the wall is yellow as well from the eyes. But yeah, so there we go. I've landed, and yeah, this is a great little setup that I've got here. I'll be looking forward to doing some flights with it in the summer. I can do some range testing, but that concludes the build, really. Yeah, so thanks for watching, and please subscribe for more videos. Cheers.